Hi, this is MXUX. This is an edition of LMX News, Lordstown Motors Corporation News. I've got some legal news here. I've got two 8Ks, an update on the Ford fire, and some rather interesting news about the earnings call and a change in the date of the earnings call. You're going to want to listen to this. I think it's an important news broadcast for LMX, so let's get started. Okay, this first news item is going to be an update on the Ford F-150 Lightning fire. And this is from a YouTuber, Larry Lynch. I'm borrowing his footage here. This is a great channel, and I do watch him, and I do like him. He's very genuine, and he has solid facts. So let's
know the exact battery issue, but there was a battery issue that caused a legitimate fire. And so much so that the local fire department was called to put out the fire, meaning it wasn't able to be contained in the factory. Maybe it's protocol to call the fire department either way, but the local fire department did put out this fire. So it was big enough to do two things. One, need to call the fire department, and two, to, well, halt production of the F-150 Lightning. The issue happened during a delivery pre-check. A spark, I guess, is what happened and turned into a flame. I don't know, again, if this is the main battery or the 12 volt that's been having issues. I'm assuming this is a different issue. If you've been following general F-150 Lightning news, you know a lot of people are having issues with their 12 volt dying, or just issues with it in general. There's like wires that are coming loose and stuff. This is a separate issue, is why I bring it up. Maybe they're more on the fire. It was big enough that it actually damaged the vehicle next to it. So it was a rather large fire. We're getting word that not only did it will definitely ruin two vehicles. We'll just leave it at that. What more do we need to know? It was a big fire. The important thing to be here is that Ford is stating that they don't believe this is an issue that can happen with your existing F-150 Lightning. That was a direct quote from Ford, and I really, really hope it's true, because that'd be a really bad look if they have to go back on that, if they see more of these issues. But I believe them. We would have seen them by now. Enough people have modded them, taken them off-road, done crazy stuff, probably used sketchy chargers. We would have seen more of these if it was
Okay, the next segment here is Autoline After Hours, a panel discussion. I believe the guy in the bottom right, his name is Tu Li. He's a Chinese-American auto expert, and he focuses on BEVs. Let's take a listen to what he has to say.
Is China going to import into the United States? That horse has already left the barn. They're going to do it. But we all know, because we all follow the auto sector, if you want to be a long-term player in the United States, you got to build locally. And so that'll be their strategy long-term. And I'll throw another little caveat out there. They could hire Foxconn to be their contract manufacturer. That's a play that they have, right? Or Magna Steyr. Yeah. So 20, 30 years ago, they couldn't do that. So.
Okay, I thought that last clip was pretty exciting. And we can see here that not only domestic or perhaps VW Scout could be turning to LMX slash Foxconn. We've got some Chinese manufacturers who, and this individual seems to have some inside information, who are really looking at Foxconn LMX for their U.S. production. So that's pretty exciting. That adds another dimension to everything. Now, this first 8K here, I had covered a legal brief that was out a couple of days ago regarding this SPAC stock issuances. This 8K involves, as you may recall, Dan Niavaji made a request for the authorization of, I think, 2 million, some such number, 200 million shares, just the authorization to issue them in case we need them. And this was also challenged by a short shill law firm, and they wanted to strike this down because the vote wasn't correct, so on. And the Chancery Court accepted a Lordstown motion to expedite this, and they have ruled in Lordstown's favor. So the challenge to this aspect of the stock, and I had mentioned in my previous video, I didn't know whether that contained this. They're almost the same issue, very similar issue. Anyway, if you put both of them together, there's no legal roadblock to the Foxconn $170 million ultimate $170 million stock purchase. So that's good news. We still have the Workhorse lawsuit, and I think that's going to take some time, and that may end up getting negotiated out of court to either a lower number of models that are going to get it, or a lower royalty. Let's move on to the next item. Okay, I'm going to do my best to summarize this, and I'm going to pause along the way here. This is an 8K that was filed by Lordstown Motors. It mentions two things. One, that they've moved the earnings call date to March 6th, so that's like an additional 10 days over what they had announced. And number two, surprise, surprise, they've announced a voluntary recall of the Lordstown Endurances, which have been produced by the company and that are in the hands of customers and staff. So there's a total of 19 trucks there. The issue is a plug, an electrical connector that can become undone, I imagine, and can result in a loss of propulsion. So not a battery fire, not out of control acceleration, what sounds like, to oversimplify, a plug that falls out and causes a loss of propulsion. They have recommended a redesign. They're talking to vendors. They're looking at a redesign of the plug, software changes to the truck, and whatever other changes may be needed to remediate this problem. Again, they have filed a voluntary NHTSA recall notice, and this is something, by the way, that Ford has not done. Again, they mentioned this applies. One report said 15 trucks. Now the report is 19 trucks. They've also paused production, and they've paused deliveries. So I guess the breadcrumb here as well is the deliveries and the production that was underway. Just by way of history, the Endurance was supposed to ramp on production. Hightower said by March of this year, by Q2. I had suspected that they were under some production regime at the moment. It sounds as though they had been. There's been no word how this was discovered. I think it's obviously a use case. Could be from internal use or from a customer. We know that at least one Endurance has been delivered, and that was necessary to qualify for the Truck of the Year award. Now we have both the Lightning and Endurance. I would say the Endurance problem is much smaller than the problem that Ford is facing. And let me just take a minute here. I'm going to pause this and get back to this. I'm going to talk about how the two problems differ. All right, guys, I'm back. What I'm going to do is run behind this vocal, some local newscast items and footage that'll give you an idea of what the current reporting is on this. And you can pause this and you can read each of those. I'll try to go over some details on those. But to compare and contrast the two Ford versus Lightning, of course, Ford, as we heard earlier, has a fire issue. They haven't seen the need to do a recall. Of course, Lordstown Motors has looks like a connector issue, and they have voluntarily, and I think it's important to stress that, voluntarily filed a NHTSA recall for all the trucks that are out. So we have that difference. We don't know what the delay is on the reporting of this from Lordstown. I'd like to say it's 0 days. I think we'll find out in the earnings call. They had mentioned since the last update in January, and since the last production update in January, this has occurred. They didn't give a specific date. Ford waited a week before they let anything out, and then they did it on Valentine's Day, and then they trickled out the information. Lordstown Motors, not knowing how long this has taken, but they certainly have been quite upfront and honest with what they're going to do as far as reporting the problem, the remediation to fix it, and so forth. And then, of course, the nature of the problems. I mean, with a battery electric vehicle, the worst possible problem you can have is a battery fire, and a connector redesign, it looks like, in a software redesign in this case, is pretty minor compared to a battery fire. So we have that. So I think so far, although we don't want any recalls, I think Lordstown Motors has been totally upfront and done a great job informing the public on what's going on exactly. And of course, the earnings call is going to give a full explanation, which is something Farley hasn't done at Ford. So we have those two comparisons. Now, the upside to this, if there is an upside, it is what appears to be a relatively minor problem. What I had said all along is we need an error-free launch of the Endurance, and this doesn't allow us to do that. So it is an issue in the grand scheme of things. If you compare and contrast this to the Ford issue, you can see that it is a smaller issue than the Ford issue. And so far, Lordstown Motors has done, in my opinion, a better job of explaining exactly what's going on than Ford did. Now, I think what we're going to wait and see here is how will Lordstown handle this on the earnings call. This is going to be critical, and the more clarity and the more honest this response is. And Hightower and the executive staff at Lordstown, you know, there's a statement on their website about how they want total transparency, and I think they're going to pursue that in this. And so we're going to have to wait for the earnings call, but they certainly have an opportunity here to really show how they will handle these types of issues should they come up in the future and so forth. And again, you can compare and contrast Ford to Lordstown Motors and see how the two methods differ. Now, I had made a video on how the Endurance was a better pickup truck than the Ford. Of course, this isn't the best news, but when you get, I think this problem is better than the problem Ford is facing. But of course, we didn't want any problems with the endurance. We'll have to see. They do mention suppliers and supplier redesign. This is a subcomponent, it sounds like, and this may be a supplier issue or a quality control issue. Now, they had initially mentioned that this was a quality control issue. That was the first word that came out. And I can tell you that the quality control person they have at Lordstown, I keep saying this, is one of the top in the country. And I am sure he has played a role in this recall. I don't know if we'll hear from him on the earnings call or not. However, I think this is a testimony to the quality control at Lordstown as well, and the transparency. I mean, with this small number of trucks out and a small number of production, I think they could have easily called this a design modification or whatever, but they didn't. They've voluntary recall with NHTSA. So that's a big deal. Not what we want to see as hodlers, but again, depending on how you look at it, it could also be viewed as a buying opportunity. Again, I think the response from Hightower and Niavaji, I don't know if they're going to bring in the quality control person. We're going to have to wait and see on that. Now, I think it's important to mention as well that according to my view, and I could be wrong on this, but I think Foxconn was doing the manufacturing, and and I'm not casting aspersion or blame here, but I'm just saying the reality of the situation is the Endurance was being contract manufactured by Foxconn, and Foxconn was handling the supply line, supply train, whatever you want to call it, for the parts and so forth. Really, Lordstown is acting, taking responsibility for a manufacturing issue. Again, this may have to do with the ficus, what CFIUS hearing we're waiting to hear. But I think we should make that clear too, that this appears, we could call it a design flaw, but we don't know that. But it is related to manufacturing as well. So I'm going to put on this video here, I'm going to put in the background several of the local news reports with details. You can pause and read these articles, and you can also read the formal release by Foxconn on this from the NASDAQ site. And the details are fairly straightforward on all of it. I don't think anybody wants to get this type of news, but in my opinion, up to this point, Lordstown has been very transparent, and we're going to see going forward how this is handled on the earnings call. They've already mentioned they're talking to suppliers about quality control of this part, perhaps. They're talking about redesigning the part as well, and they're also talking about a software redesign. So obviously this has to do with the propulsion system, the hub motor system. Good to hear that it's not the software per se or the hub motors. It sounds like a a plumbing problem. Sounds like we've got a loose connector. So, and well, we haven't been told whether it's in the battery or where this connection is taking place. If it is between the inverter and the motor, is it the line, to the motor, the hub motor itself? Is it the other end of that line? I believe goes to the battery. So the battery has not been mentioned, and it's been propulsion. So I think you can deduce from that some of the connectors to the hub motors would seem to me to be the obvious choice for this. Now, Hightower has made the statement that they're going to have total transparency on this, and they're going to work with the investors and the customers to see this through. So I think that, again, we have an opportunity here to see how Lordstown Motors handles this in the earnings call. The stock has taken a hit, but not that bad of a hit. Again, can be seen as a buying opportunity, perhaps. We'll see. This is MXUX. Good luck in the market.